Everybody, just want to welcome you to the fall 2021 semester for the ME 124 Materials and Mechanics Lab. So the first thing I would like to do is go over the agenda for this first lecture. So within this lecture, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the syllabus, go through all the pertinent information and details. And I want to note that the syllabus will also be posted to Blackboard, so you can reference back to this at any time for this information. Then we're going to go through our course schedule. Within the course schedule, we can take a look and see when each of the individual labs are throughout the semester, when the scheduled lectures are, when the lab reports are due, and all this information will also be posted with the schedule on Blackboard as well, so you can reference back to this. Then we're going to go through the 6 individual labs, talk briefly about each of those, and discuss the grading. And one thing I want to note is I'll be using Blackboard as a primary source of communication throughout the semester. So this is where you can go back to reference any of these materials that I've mentioned above, along with some other resources for each of the individual labs and lectures. This will all be on Blackboard. Now, I will be using Teams for our remote synchronous lectures on Wednesdays as well, and we can see which days we have those lectures by going back to our course schedule. And the last thing I'm going to talk about within this first lecture is our lab safety. So, description of the course. What we're going to do here is we're going to introduce experimentation, engineering measurements, data analysis in solid mechanics, instrumentation for dynamic measurements, photoelasticity, mechanical testing, and heat treatments of engineering materials. So this is a rough overview of what we'll be looking at this semester. I'll get into some more details with each of the 6 labs that we'll be performing. Your prerequisite and co-requisite for this course that you've taken ME 101. So we're expected that you have this knowledge and these resources as you're going back and writing up your reports. So now I want to take some time and go into a little bit more detail for this course information. So for the lecture portion of this course, this is going to be on Wednesdays, and we can reference back to our schedule to see which Wednesdays we have these lectures scheduled for. And these are going to be remote and synchronous, and they're going to be broadcast on Teams. So again, please go back to that schedule to reference which days we will have these lectures through Teams. The location for these lecture portion of this course is going to be on Teams, but also I will be posting the lecture slides, relative videos, information, data for the labs and for the lectures on Blackboard. So you can always reference back to the modules within Blackboard for any of that information that I'll be posting. Now, as far as the lab goes, the lab is going to be fully in person this semester, and the TA will be running the individual sections of the lab, and these will be located in VOTI 246. For the lab portion of this course. Now, which section do you attend? This is going to be dependent upon which section you signed up for. So you have A1, A2, A3, A4, and A5. So we have 5 different lab sections. We can see Lab A1 is going to be on Mondays from 2:20 to 3:55. Lab 2 is going to be on Wednesdays from 2:20 to 3:35. Lab 3 is on Thursdays from 4:20 to 5:55. Lab 4 is on Thursdays from 4:20 to 5:55. And the last lab, number 5, is on Fridays from 2:20 to 3:55. So these are the individual lab section times that, again, are going to be in person in VOTI 246, whereas the lecture is going to be on select Wednesdays from 8:30 to 9:20 a.m. And again, this won't be every single Wednesday, so please reference back to that schedule to look and see which Wednesday is going to be the lectures for this semester. So as I mentioned, I will be teaching the synchronous remote lecture portion for this course. I am Dr. Burns. The teaching assistant, Brandon Gamble, will be running the individual lab sections in VOTI 246 with the hands-on. And for both the labs and the lectures, you can reference back to Blackboard for any resources that you may need. So this will be used extensively for the distribution of the lab handouts, lecture notes, and other relative material you'll need throughout the semester. So let's get into a little bit about the grading. So for this course here, there's going to be 3 major components to your grade. The bulk of your points are going to come from your laboratory reports. This is 72%. So this is 6 lab reports, 6 different labs that we're doing and turning in, 12% each. And there will be an adjustment based upon your peer review. So there'll be a midterm peer review and a final peer review. And this is to make sure that every member of your group is contributing. And this is your opportunity to let everybody know, me and the graders specifically, of everybody's contribution levels. The other portion, next portion of your grade is going to be a laboratory notebook. So we ask that you please keep a laboratory notebook throughout the semester. And what we'll be having you do is at the end, we'll have you scan in a couple of the key pages for this onto Blackboard, and that's how this portion of the grade for the laboratory notebook or your class participation, lab participation portion of the grade will be determined. Lastly, there will be a final exam. This will be 20% of your grade. This will be an online Blackboard, probably about 20 questions, multiple choice, all related to your readings on the lectures and the laboratory handouts. So I will be providing you some handouts, templates, and introductory lectures all through Blackboard that you guys can use to reference for how you write your lab reports. Any other questions, please visit my office hours or discuss with your TAs, either in the lab or during their office hours as well. We have some pretty good templates set out for you guys, so it should be pretty straightforward as far as what we're expecting for the format for these lab reports. So again, peer review, I'll briefly go over this again. This is where you're going to review all your team members here. Any of the deficiencies that are noted here will be addressed. So if the peer review is not improved from the midterm to the final, 20% of the lab report grade will be removed. This is up for negotiation as well, so please just feel this is a way for you to express any concerns you have for the contribution levels of your group members in a private setting between just me and you and the graders, so that we can adjust these correctly based upon everybody's performance and their review status within this peer review. So for your laboratory notebook, what we're going to be utilizing this for is to document your work along the way, any data that you collected, calculations, graphs, little notes. So you might say, okay, in this one here, we ended up moving the extensometer to a different location. We were a couple degrees under with the temperature for this collection of data. Things like that, just little notes and things that you did when you're collecting data, or abnormalities as you're setting things up in the lab. And these are going to be important to help you more than anything as you start writing up your labs. Again, final exam, 20 questions, multiple choice, all on Blackboard. Going to be the basic review of the engineering theory and techniques from the laboratory. So a lot of these questions are going to draw directly from my lecture slides and presentations throughout the semester. So for this course, ME 124, I will be holding office hours as well as the TA. For my office hours, these are scheduled for Wednesdays from 9:30 a.m. till 10:30 a.m. Now this is a time slot right after our Wednesday morning lectures, which will be remote on Teams. So our office hours will also be virtual office hours, and they will be held using Microsoft Teams. Now if you need extra help but you're not able to attend these, or you need another time period, please feel free to reach out and contact me at dburns@uvm.edu, and I will find a time that works for both of us to get together to go through any material that you'd like covered, and we can set up a time to do a virtual office hour outside of this regularly scheduled slot. Next, I'd like to go through our schedule for the fall 2021 semester. So within this schedule, you can see I've broken this down. We have over here in our left column our starting date for each week. So we can see this is week number 1, our module number 1, and this starts the week of August 30th, and our week 2 module number 2 is going to start the week of September 6th, so on and so forth, all the way up till the end of the semester. We can see this is our last week here, our module 15, week 15, which starts the week of December 6th. Now within this schedule, you can see I also have this lecture section here where I let you know when our lectures are and what the topic of that lecture are. You can see this is going to be our lecture 1, module 1. Yes, there'll be a lecture that week, and the topic is going to be introduction. Now we can see over here we have our lab section here, and our lab topic for this first week, our module 1, week 1, there is no lab, so there's no lab topic here. You can see our last column over here lets us know what's due this week, and this is our deliverable, and nothing's due this first week. So as we move on to our week 2, module 2, starting September 6th, you can see, yes, there is going to be a lecture this week, and the lecture topic is going to be the material for our lab 1A. There's not going to be any lab this week, and the reason there's no lab this week is because this is going to be our Labor Day vacation on September 6th, so there are some classes scheduled, or some lab sections scheduled for that day, so there's not going to be any labs this week. So we can note right at the beginning from our schedule, there are no in-person labs the first 2 weeks of class. What there are going to be are remote synchronous lectures on Teams for these first 2 weeks and these first 2 modules. Now, as we move on to our week 3, module 3, starting the date of September 13th, you can see, yes, there is going to be a lecture, and the topic for this lecture, we're going to take a look at the material for lab 1B, and now we are going to have our first in-person hands-on laboratory experiment on this week, our module 3, week 3, and this is going to be covering the experiment for lab 1A dealing with photoelasticity. And as we move on to our week 4, module 4, we're still going to have a remote synchronous lecture on Teams, and this is going to be covering the topic of our Lab 2 experimentation. And there is also going to be our second in-person hands-on lab that week in VOTI 246, and this is going to be our Lab 1B, working with photoelasticity calibration experiment there. Now, as we move on to week 5, there is no lecture this week. So there is no lecture on that Wednesday on Teams, but there is going to be an in-person lab, Module 5, Week 5, on this week of September 27th, and this is going to be the experiment for Lab 2, beam, stiffness, and vibration. Now, the other thing to note here, in week 5, module 5, this is the first deliverable you have, so your report for lab 1 will be due that week. So we go on through the rest of the semester here, and you can see for module 6, week 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you can see which times we have our lectures and which times we have our lab sections for each of these, and the corresponding what experiment goes with that lab and what material goes with each of those lectures. And you can also go through and see when each of your reports are due and all the deliverables all the way down through to the end of the semester. So the purpose behind these lectures is to give you guys a little bit of the relevant background and your theory for the upcoming experiments that you'll be running in the lab with the TAs. So what theory should you remember from your previous courses? So I'm going to be highlighting some of the stuff you may have seen in earlier courses, not going through in extreme detail, because this is stuff that's going to be a little bit of a refresher for you and just remind you of things that you need to draw from. Because as you notice, there's no textbook for this course, so you're expected to be utilizing some of the textbooks from your previous courses. I'm going to be talking a little bit about the technology that you'll be using and how it works as far as the laboratory equipment goes, what measurements you should be taking throughout the labs for your data analysis, if there's any sources of errors, what those should be, and what calculations you should be completing, and a couple of the key equations associated with that. So that's kind of what you can expect from the lectures. It's just kind of an overview with the background theory and information that you'll need for the laboratories that you'll have coming up. So that's why the lectures will be done prior to that experiment in the lab. I'd like to take some time now to discuss our laboratories. So these laboratories are in person, hands-on, in VOTI 246. Now attendance is going to be mandatory for these. You're going to learn a lot by actually being in the labs and running these experiments. So this is something that is mandatory. You're going to be part of a team, so your group is going to be dependent upon you to contribute to running the experiments, collecting data, and writing the report. So your attendance is going to be mandatory for all of these laboratories. As you come to these labs, please bring your laboratory notebook with you along with your laboratory instructions. So I would suggest and encourage you to ahead of time read through the Blackboard, take the information from the lecture slide, from the lectures that we give on Wednesdays, and bring this all with you to the lab so you're well prepared and you're not fumbling around at the beginning of the lab. You know exactly what you're supposed to do, what the experiment is, what you should be collecting for data, and all the information. So bring your laboratory instructions with you along with your notebook. So these laboratory instructions will be posted on Blackboard, so you can print those out, bring it on your tablet, bring it on your laptop, whatever you prefer, but bring those to the lab with you. And again, be prepared, have gone through those, paid attention during the lecture so you'll know what to do and what's expected for these experiments for each of these individual labs. So also, as I mentioned, bring your laboratory notebook. This is portion of your grade at the end of the semester. So keep a good detailed laboratory notebook throughout the semester for something that you will be handing in as a portion of your grade at the end of the semester. So again, I covered this, but I want to emphasize this. Be ready for your lab sections. Don't just show up and not have any idea what's going on. Be prepared, read through, pay attention to the lectures, read through the lecture slides, read all the supplemental material. And again, you want to attend these lectures prior. So if we look back at that schedule, these lectures are in advance to each of the labs. You'll be going through the material, the topics within these lectures before coming in and running these experiments. So the thing to note is these laboratories are time intensive. So this is again why you want to be prepared going into those so you can get in there and actually run the experiment, collect the data during that time there, and you're not spending that time rereading the lecture notes and understanding what's going on. So this is something you really want to be careful of. Make sure you're prepared as you're coming into the labs. And for your lab notebook, what I'd ask you to do is get a composition notebook here. This is for you to provide a detailed chronicle of everything that occurs during the laboratories. Please, on each page, make sure you label and date each entry related back to whatever experiment you're doing and portion of that experiment. Again, this is to help keep you organized so you can reference back to this as you start doing your lab reports. So the more neat and organized it is, the better it is to help you do that. Within this, you should include the theory from lecture notes and handouts. You say, okay, in lecture 2 on the 5th slide, I saw this relationship, this governing equation I'm going to use there. So you can quickly go back and utilize that when you're writing up your lab reports. What equipment was used, resolutions, short descriptions and drawings of your experimental setup, key procedural steps, data recorded, so what your data acquisition rate was, things like that. If there's any issues that went wrong, please note those for your lab report. Observations for what you saw happen, post-experimental data analysis and calculations, and if you want to either glue in or just hand sketch in a couple of graphs of what you think they should look like, or what you saw on some of the digital display outputs within the laboratory equipment. Another thing to know actually as you're doing this is it is important to keep the laboratory notebook, but also with technology, it would be nice as well if within this you took a lot of pictures as well of these laboratory setups, possible errors, descriptions of the equipment, so you can take a picture of the equipment and then put a description next to it. So some images would be great too, and those will be great to put into your lab reports. So let's talk a little bit about the lab write-ups. It's going to be 6 different labs, 6 different lab write-ups that you'll have due for the semester. So these reports are going to have due dates noted in the syllabus, course schedule, and on Blackboard. There'll be release dates and due dates for this. So there's no real reason for any of these to be late. And if they are late, you will lose points for it. So you're going to write up these reports as a group. You're going to assign roles, sections. Somebody may be doing the FEA analysis or the CAD drawing. Somebody might be doing the hand calculations. Somebody might be doing the actual write-up or the background and theory section. So whatever it is, make sure you assign your roles and sections to help divide and conquer the individual tasks for this lab write-up. Combine all of these sections together. Make sure it flows in a good manner. Double check each other's spelling, grammar, coherence. Check your units for your figures, your labeling, and your tables. Make sure you get it scanned in and posted up to Blackboard. Or if you're typing it out, just please submit it as a PDF. Usually works best, but Microsoft Word is also acceptable. And also make sure to note there's a peer review of the workload of the sharing of this workload. So at the end of your report, you can say, Johnny did this part, Sarah did this part, Joe did this part. Just so you know later on, if there is any issues when you do your peer evaluations, we can look back and see who was doing which portion of the lab write-up. So being that we are in a laboratory setting, safety becomes very, very important. There's a potential of getting injured within this. So please pay attention to any warnings, listen to the TAs, read through all the documentation before starting the experiment. There'll also be safety videos I have posted up to Blackboard as well. Please read through all of these before you attend your first laboratory. Another thing here in the lab, please don't bring any food or drinks in. Safety glasses when required. Make sure that you have closed-toed shoes, no sandals or open-toed shoes. Make sure if you have anything, longer hair ties, jewelry, things like that, they're tucked back or put away, not worn in the laboratory. And keep your cell phone usage to a minimum just so you're paying attention to each other and the equipment. So now what we're going to do is we're going to get into just a quick overview of each of the 6 laboratories that you're going to be going through. So the first laboratory you're going to have is Lab 1A and 1B, and this deals with photoelasticity. What we're going to be looking at specifically is some beam bending and strain visualization. Now within photoelasticity, some of the things you're going to be looking at within the lab are the fringe constant determination. So there's a lot of documentation within my lecture and with all the supplemental material that I've uploaded to Blackboard for you as well. A portion of this that's going to be very important is your calibration of the equipment as you set it up. And that's going to be the case for all of these labs and experiments you're working on. And also utilizing the correct test equipment. Again, so I can't stress this enough, please read through the documentation, look through the lecture slides before coming to lab so you have a good understanding of how to utilize all of this. The laboratory TA will also be giving a brief lecture at the intro to the lab going over all of that and talking about the equipment as well. So lab 2, we're going to deal with lab 2 is beam deflection and free vibration. Some of the equipment that you're going to be utilizing within this lab is the strain gauges, your strain gauge amplifier, data acquisition equipment, and doing some spectrum analysis as well. So again, please read through all of the materials, become familiar with all of these, review back to some of your other courses that you've dealt with strain gauges in the past, how to apply these. Again, the TA will go over the details as well, but the more background information you have prior to going in, the more you're going to be able to get out of these laboratories. Lab 3, we're starting to deal with a pressurized cylinder. So this is going to be a pipe and pressure vessel analysis. So you can see here, this is the equipment that we're going to be utilizing here. We're going to have some strain gauge rosettes. You're going to need to learn how to use those or refresh yourself on how to use those and acquire data from them. And we're using Moore's circles and some principal stresses and strains for the data analysis. Now, as we get into lab 4 and 5 here, this is going to deal with heat treatment and hardening of some different material samples. So we're going to take a look at the ASTM standards for a geometry bar test, and we're going to utilize that within this laboratory for the experimental setup. The hardenability of steels by quenching, so we're dealing with some quenching relationships, equations, and calculations. We're also going to be talking about the Rockwell hardness testing, and we can see over here in this image here, our Rockwell hardness tester there that we're going to be utilizing on the samples. Now for the 5th lab here, this is going to be 2 parts, part A and B, and this is where we're going to be dealing with some tensile testing. So this is a really fun lab. We're going to be using an Instron machine that you can see up here. We have this right in the laboratory there for you guys. So we're going through taking a look at some of the ASTM standards for tensile testing, look at a couple different material types here, 6061 aluminum, some 4031 steel, looking at the effects of quenching and tempering on the steel, and we're going to be comparing the results as you run the tension tests on those different samples. And lastly, we're going to be using a standing electron microscope after we've pulled these samples and cracked them to take a look at the individual cracks in those samples close up. So lab 6, what we're going to be dealing with here is fracture mechanics testing. So within this laboratory here, you can see some of the equipment that we'll be utilizing here. And this will be fatigue, crack propagation, looking at plane strain, fracture toughness, utilizing a couple different materials. I want to take this time now to discuss the remote synchronous lectures on Teams for ME124A. So this is just for the lecture portion of our ME124A Material and Mechanics course. So the lab section is still going to be in person, hands-on, in VOTI 246. Just the lecture portion will be remote through Teams. So this again is the Wednesdays. If you go back to your schedule, this will be the remote synchronous lectures on Teams for this portion of the course, and this will be completely remote and synchronous again. So I just want to clarify that it's just the lecture portion that are going to be remote and synchronous through Teams. The labs are going to be hands-on, in person, and the TA will be running those labs. For this course, I will be using a weekly module outline via Blackboard. Now within each of these weekly modules, these are going to contain your weekly lecture slides, and this is going to relate back to those live synchronous lectures that I'll be giving on Teams. So I'll be including a copy of these slides on Blackboard for you to go back, reference, and use for your lab experiments and your lab write-ups. Also contained within these modules are some lab overviews and videos related to some of the experiments and lab setup, along with some other related material that will be useful within your lab experiments and your lab write-ups. Now my objective with these weekly modules is to give you guys enough options to learn the materials effectively without overwhelming you with too many materials and too many options. So I've done this in a manner to help keep this course neat and organized. So this should be easy for you to follow along, and that way you can spend your time learning material rather than trying to navigate through an overwhelming amount of material on a disorganized Blackboard. So that's my goal behind these weekly module formats that I've come up with. Now, another thing to note here, I will also be available via Teams for any face-to-face questions you may have throughout the semester, so I'll have designated office hours. And also on our Wednesday lectures, I will save time at the beginning for you guys and at the end of that lecture for you to ask any questions you may have related to the labs or the write-ups or any other information. Also, the TA will be available in person during the lab experiments, and he will also have office hours as well. So you'll have plenty of opportunity to ask any questions you may have related to these labs, lectures, and experiments.